African French is the generic name of the varieties of French spoken by an estimated 120 million people in Africa spread across 24 francophone countries. This includes those who speak French as a first or second language in these 31 francophone African countries, but it does not include French speakers living in non-francophone African countries. Africa is thus the continent with the most French speakers in the world. French arrived in Africa as a colonial language. These African French speakers are now an important part of the francophonie. In Africa, French is often spoken alongside indigenous languages, but in some areas it has become a first language, such as in the region of Abidjan, Ivory Coast to Libreville, Gabon. In some countries it is a first language among some classes of the population, such as in Tunisia, Morocco and Algeria, where French is a first language among the upper classes, but only a second language among the general population. In each of the francophone African countries, French is spoken with local specificities in terms of pronunciation and vocabulary. Varieties. There are many different varieties of African French, but they can be broadly grouped into 4 categories. The French spoken by people in Western Central, spoken altogether by about 75 million people as either a first or second language. The French variety spoken by Maghrebis and Berbers in Northwest Africa, which has about 36 million first and second language speakers. The French variety spoken in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. The French variety spoken by Creoles in the Indian Ocean, which has around 1.6 million first and second language speakers. The French spoken in this region is not to be confused with the French-based Creole languages, which are also spoken in the area. All the African French varieties differ from Standard French both in terms of pronunciation and vocabulary, but the formal African French used in education, media, and legal documents is based on Standard French vocabulary. In the colonial period, a vernacular form of Creole French known as Petit Nègre was also present in West Africa. The term has since, however, become a pejorative term for poorly spoken African French. V.Y. Mudimbe describes African French as possessing approximate pronunciation, repressed syntax, bloated or tortured vocabulary, intonation, rhythm and accent stuck in the original African language flow, many phonetic, morphologic and lexical Africanisms. The differences from European French are due to influence from the mother tongues and the complexity of French grammatical rules, which inhibit its learning by most non-native speakers. The difficulty linguists have in describing African French comes from variations, such as the pure language used by many African intellectuals and writers versus the mixtures between French and African languages. For this, the term creolization is used, often in a pejorative way, and especially in the areas where French is on the same level with one or more local languages. According to G. Manessi, the consequences of this concurrency may vary according to the social status of the speakers, to their occupations, to the degree of acculturation and thus to the level of the French knowledge. Code switching, or the alternation of languages within a single conversation, takes place in both Senegal and in Democratic Republic of the Congo, the latter having 4 national languages, Kakongad, Lingala, Saluba, and Swahili, which are in a permanent opposition to French. Code switching has been studied since colonial times by different institutions of linguistics. One of these, located in Dakar, Senegal, already spoke of the creolization of French in 1968, naming the result Franlo, a mix of French and Wolof which spreads by its use in urban areas and through schools, where teachers often speak Wolof in the classroom despite official instructions. The omnipresence of local languages in francophone African countries, along with insufficiencies in education, has given birth to a new linguistic Concept: Le Petit Français. Le Petit Français is the result of a superposition of the structure of a local language with a narrowed lexical knowledge of French. The specific structures, though very different, are juxtaposed, marking the beginning of the creolization process. Français populaire africain. In the urban areas of Francophone Africa, another type of French has emerged, Français populaire africain or FPA. It is used in the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa, but especially in African cities such as Abidjan, Ivory Coast, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, Dakar, Senegal, Cotonou, Benin, and Lomé, Togo. At its emergence, it was marginalized and associated with the ghetto. Angel Bassolewa Treogo describes the reaction of the scholars. However, FPA has begun to emerge as a second language among the upper class. It has also become a symbol of social acceptance. FPA can be seen as a progressive evolution of Ivorian French. After diffusing out of Ivory Coast, it became Africanized under the influence of young Africans in cinema, drama, and dance. FPA has its own grammatical rules and lexicon. For example, il a el penant me tué, or il a el penant me ja, can either mean, this person annoys me very much, or I'm dying for him, her, depending on the circumstances. Il a el commence me plaire signifies a feeling of exasperation, and friendship can be expressed with c'est mon mogo sur, or c'est mon bramogo. FPA is mainly composed of metaphors and images taken from African languages. For example, the upper social class is called les Nodeno or les mogos puissants. Pronunciation. Pronunciation in the many varieties of African French can be quite varied. There are nonetheless some trends among African French speakers. For instance, the letter R tends to be pronounced as an alveolar trill instead of the standard dialect's uvular trill or guttural R. The voiced uvular fricative, the sound represented by in the Arabic word Maghreb, is another common alternative pronunciation of the letters, and may also vary, and intonation may differ from standard French. Vocabulary. In terms of vocabulary, there exist three phenomena in African French. First, the presence of words which do not exist in standard French. These words were either coined locally or borrowed from a local African languages. As a consequence, each regional variety of African French has its own local words that are not the same as in other varieties of African French, although this local vocabulary only constitutes a small part of the overall vocabulary, which for the most part is identical to standard French. When talking to people from other regions or countries, African French speakers often switch to a more standard form of French, avoiding this local vocabulary. However, there also exist some African French words that are found across many African countries. A second phenomenon is the use of some words with a meaning different from standard French. For example, the word pressentiment is used a lot in sub-Saharan Africa with the meaning of as a matter of fact, as it were, and not at the moment. A third phenomenon is hypercorrection, which is found especially among the educated and upper classes of sub-Saharan Africa. Educated people tend to speak a very formal sort of French which may sound a bit old-fashioned and conservative to European and North American French speakers. This is somewhat similar to the way English is spoken by people of the upper class in India. The local African French vocabulary not found in standard French ranges from slang frowned upon by educated people, to colloquial usage, to words that have entered the formal usage. The French spoken in Abidjan, the largest city of Ivory Coast, offers a good example of these contrasting registers. Abidjan French vocabulary. According to some estimates, French is spoken by 75 to 99% of Abidjan's population, either alone or alongside indigenous African languages. There are three sorts of French spoken in Abidjan. A formal French is spoken by the educated classes. Most of the population, however, speaks a colloquial form of French known as Français de Tricval or Français de Morse. Finally, an Abidjan French slang called Nuchi is spoken by people in gangs and also by young people copying them. New words usually appear in Nuchi and then make their way into colloquial Abidjan French after some time. As of 2012, a crowdsourced dictionary of Nuchi is being written using mobile phones. Here are some examples of words used in the African French variety spoken in Abidjan. Ungo is a slang word meaning a girl or a girlfriend. It is a loan word either from the Mandinka language or from English. It is also French hip-hop slang for a girl. Unmaki is a colloquial word meaning a street-side eatery, a working-class restaurant serving African food. This word exists in Standard French, but its meaning is maki shrubland, and by extension, gorilla, see maki. It is not known exactly how this word came to mean street-side restaurant in Ivory Coast. Unbramogo is a slang word equivalent to bloke or dude in English. It is a loan word from the Mandinka language. Chicota is a word meaning to whip, to beat, or to chastise. It is a loan word from Brazilian Portuguese where it meant to whip. It has now entered the formal language of the educated classes. Lapierre is a slang word meaning money. It comes perhaps from the Standard French word piece-à-pierre, or perhaps piastre. When speaking in a formal context, or when meeting French speakers from outside Ivory Coast, Abidjan speakers would replace these local words with the French standard words une fille, un restaurant or une cantine, and copain, butter, and l'argent respectively. Note that similar local words are used across several African countries. For example, chicota is attested not only in Ivory Coast, but also in Senegal, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, the Central African Republic, Benin, Togo, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As already mentioned, these local words range from slang to formal usage, and the use therefore varies depending on the context. In Abidjan, this is how the sentence, "The girls stole my money," is constructed depending on the register. Formal Abidjan French of the educated people, la fille me subtilise mon argent. Colloquial Abidjan French, fille reprend mon l'argent. Abidjan French slang, le go a momo mon pied. Kinshasa French vocabulary with more than 8 million inhabitants. Kinshasa is the second largest francophone city in the world after Paris. It is the capital of the most populous francophone country in the world, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where an estimated 24 million people can speak French. Contrary to Abidjan, where French is the first language of a large part of the population, in Kinshasa French is only a second language, and its status of lingua franca is shared with Lingala. Kinshasa French also differs from other African French variants, for it has some Belgian French influences due to colonization. People of different African mother tongues living in Kinshasa usually speak Lingala to communicate with each other in the street, but French is the language of businesses, administrations, schools, newspapers and televisions. French is also the predominant written language. Due to its widespread presence in Kinshasa, French has become a local language with its own pronunciation and similar local words borrowed for the most part from Lingala. Depending on the social status, some people may mix French and Lingala, or code switch between the two depending on the context. Here are examples of words particular to Kinshasa French. As in Abidjan, none. There exist various registers, and the most educated people may frown upon the use of slangish Lingala terms. Cadavere means broken, worn out, exhausted, or dead. It is the local pronunciation of the standard French word cadavre, whose meaning in standard French is corpse. The word cadavere has now spread to other African countries due to the popularity of Congolese music in Africa. Makasi means strong, resistant. It is a loan word from Lingala, anti-newt of sunglasses worn by partiers at night. It is a word coined locally and whose literal meaning in standard French is anti-night. It is one of the many Kinshasa slang words related to nightlife and partying. A reveler is known locally as un ambiantia, from standard French ambiance, which means atmosphere. Casser le bic, literally to break the bic, means to stop going to school. Bic is colloquially used to refer to a ballpoint pen in Belgian French and Kinshasa French, but not in standard French. Merci mingi means thank you very much. It comes from standard French merci in Lingala mingi. Unzibolita is a bottle opener. It comes from the Lingala verb kozabola, which means to open something that is blocked up, a bottle, to which was added the standard French ending at -er. Untaitanos is a rickety old taxi. In standard French, tétanos means tetanus. Moyenne vraiment means absolutely impossible. It comes from moyenne, itself made up of standard French moyenne and Lingala tête, which was added standard French vraiment.